Okay. We're moving into social justice and change and cultural impact. So we would welcome Natica Bach and Alex Dolson and Kim Coltman to the front. They're coming, I promise.
Sorry. I'm bringing my own chair.
You did it, you made, and look, you all kind of match.
Well, look at that.
Yeah.
We do.
They made the phone call before. Like, yeah, Sadie, I could have put you on this panel too, right? You also would have matched. Yeah. Can't go wrong.
My bag's out there driving me nuts.
All been there. Also common places.
I've had bags since the 80s. I just don't want to.
Good for you. Never too late to change.
Nope, never do that. Wrap it up.
Oh, don't worry. That's just for me.
I wore the wrong dress for this kind of chair.
You got it. I gave it.
Look forward to a flash of thigh.
You wrapped. That's fine. Bring it.
Why not? We're allowed to be sexy too.
Oh, I know.
Don't worry. You're preaching to the choir.
Good.
Excellent. Okay, so Dana, are we good to go? Oh, wait 1 minute. Okay.
I have a battery issue.
Oh, as happens. That's the same. Just like internal battery issue.
I'm curious how the men feel in the room right now.
Yeah.
Well, there's
I just wait for a question. I can look and see all the nods.
I'm I Fashion Speaks in English. Oh, okay. Where are you? I am. Okay.
Don't worry. We'll
So
talk
are
about
you?
it.
Yes.
And again, I think that, that was an interesting point that Dana brought up about men in the room. My desire is that these conversations would also be so honest and so real, and with the idea of unification, that is absolutely great to have men in the room, because, we can't move towards this goal if we don't do it together. The idea is not to conquer and divide. It's to unify and conquer. Are we good? Thanks, Garrett. You guys can give Garrett the hand too. Okay, we're welcoming now Natica Bach, who is the manager of supportive housing. Natica down at the end. Alex Dolson, who is a registered social worker, and Kim Coltman, who is the founder of Fashion Speaks, and was previously also a social worker and counselor.
Yes.
Would you give these ladies a round of applause? Thanks for joining us. I'm going to do the same thing and just take a moment, introduce yourselves, what you'd like us to know about you, and a little about what you do. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I thought we were going to start with the person.
No problem.
Okay. My name's Kim Coltman. I am a fashion model. I have been since 1972. I became an international fashion model in 1977. I have worked with some of the most amazing people in the world, but also in an industry that is probably one of the worst for misogyny. Casting couches weren't set aside specifically for the film industry. It crossed over into the fashion industry and all other realms, really. If you wanted to do well in an industry, men were telling you, lay down and we'll lift you up. Well, that was incorrect then, it's incorrect now. So that's something that I've been battling for my entire life, really.
So is it a unique experience for you to be able to talk about that openly, or is that a conversation that you've been hearing in the wider world for a while?
It's a conversation that I have with every one of my models. I now train models. So it's a conversation that we have openly with our male and female models, because it works, it happens to the male models as well. It's not unique to female models. The male models often get harassed by women in the industry. When I first started in the fashion industry, the fashion designers were predominantly male. The industry was predominantly male run. However, all of the women that were in the industry were the props, I suppose you would say. One of the things that I tell all of my models is that we are salespeople. That's what we do for a living. We are glorified salespeople, much like a flight attendant is a glorified steward or waitress. So there are different aspects to each job that I think can relate back to other jobs. One of the things that I do quite frequently within my work now, working with young people who are going into the industry, is I utilize the skills that I have from having worked with Catholic Social Services in programs such as apartment management training, young offenders, youth at risk, so a safe house program. So now my main focus is keeping them safe. My main focus is keeping women in particular safe, but also LGBTQ, all of the people who are marginalized and therefore become victims.
And I think that's a common theme to this panel too, is that these are all women who work with marginalized people and people who are easily exploited, to be perfectly frank. And it's an excellent thing to see these roles now elevated in our society where we talk about that. Alex, would you tell us a little bit about you and what you do?
My name's Alex Dolson. I'm a registered social worker. I work with the Y Women's Emergency Shelter, and I'm in family support there. So I have the honor of working with women and children who are fleeing violent situations. I also work with the Kamloops Sexual Assault Counseling Center, and I coordinate their domestic violence and sexual assault response team. So that's a program where we have volunteers trained to go and support survivors in a hospital context after they've experienced an assault. Other than that, that feels like everything I do, but there's more to it. I'm also a single parent, I'm a burlesque performer, I'm a person of faith. Yeah.
You're all the things. Is a program like that, this Sexual Survivor Support Program, sorry, what's the actual name of it?
SART.
Right, which I know, but
Sexual Assault Response Team.
Response Team. Is that a new program? How long has something like that been in place? Because it's a unique support for women during the darkest time.
Absolutely, and I should mention that that program isn't specifically for women, so any survivor that presents at the hospital is able to access that. It is new, and it's also not new. So Kamloops had a really robust crisis line and SART program through KSAC, the Sexual Assault Counseling Center, in the 90s and early 2000s. Unfortunately, that funding was cut at a provincial level in the early 2000s, and so that program was cut. A couple years ago, KSAC received some funding on a small scale to try and start that up again. And so it's lots of people in the community are familiar with it. It's a program that runs in lots of other communities, but we are still in the very kind of early stages of trying to rebuild that.
I'm curious about that prioritization too, that's where we would cut funding, right? A service that probably does primarily serve women.
And that was not unique to Kamloops. Across the province, a lot of women-centered programming lost their funding at that time.
And I'm willing to bet that if there were more women represented in politics, that might be a little bit different. Those numbers may have shifted. So hopefully we'll get to touch on that during our political panel as well. Not on a provincial level, don't worry. Thanks for that, Alex. And how about you? Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Sure. Before I begin, I just want to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territory of the Kamloops people.
Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, you're welcome. And it's an active acknowledgement, recognizing that we are aligned with the traditional values, the land and the language that has been spoken here since time began. And now I'm going to speak in Michif for the Michif women that are in the room, so Kim and Dana and Brittany. Bonsoir, Tonchakiawao, Nadakania, Datuscan Canadian Mental Health Association. So I just said, good evening, hi, how is everyone? My name is Nadaka, and I work for CMHA. I'm the manager of supportive housing there, and I work at the branch, probably one of the most hated transition houses in all of Kamloops. So,
why do you say that?
Because we support very marginalized people that are exiting homelessness, and we transition them eventually into our modulars, which are very delayed. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So when you say hated, it's because there's a particular connotation that people have attached to the
Yeah,
kind of
there's
people
a
that
lot
you serve.
there's a lot of stigma. So they just hardscaped Maxim area across the street from us to keep people off. So I don't know what the point of hardscaping is. Like, I don't know where they're supposed
When
to
you
go.
say hardscaping,
With big rocks and boulders and things like that, so people can't live anywhere. We have about 300 people that are identified as absolutely homeless right now in Kamloops.
we're looking for places to sleep.
That's right,
Okay.
and the river's high, so
Yeah.
but we get a lot of calls and complaints around people, and then I see these articles around animals and how we need to support them better and things like that, so yeah.
And you would like to see the same for people.
Yes.
So I would say that you all work with vulnerable people on some level, have or do. A lot of them being women. What would you say your percentage is of the women you serve compared to the men that you serve in your industry?
In my industry, probably 80% women.
Okay, and Ellen?
I mean, I work at a women's shelter, so exclusively
So a lot of women.
Or folks that identify as women, so we do serve trans women as well. We serve children, so there's lots of young boys there. Anecdotally, the SART program, since it restarted in 2016, has not had a male survivor present. And that's not because males don't experience sexual assault, it's because they're not seeking services.
Just something we'd like to change.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yeah, we're not looking just to change things for women. We're looking to better serve people.
If we don't change it for them too, then we can't possibly be successful in changing it thoroughly for
Yeah,
us.
exactly.
So I work mostly with men, but we have the most women that are sex trade workers that live at the branch. So, and we're successful, we've had a lot of successes actually with very hard to house people, that's what they're called, at the branch. Yeah, but I just want to say that a lot of I work purposefully, we have 50% Indigenous people that live at the branch to match the homeless statistics. And I often think that our Indigenous women are either murdered or missing or housed or in other vulnerable situations. So, but we haven't really looked at that. And we haven't really dug very deep with those.
Just starting to have those conversations. Quite a bit too late.
Well, I think publicly we are, but I think
Yeah.
these conversations have been going on for
Yes.
a long time.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I mean, on a broader scale, right, where it's on everybody's radar and not just the people it directly affects, because it should directly affect us all.
Yeah.
So on that note, what are the unique barriers that you see within the structure that you work in for both women and women Indigenous women or marginalized women? How does that structure affect them in a unique way?
The majority of the women that I work with are Indigenous. We are an Indigenous agency, but we welcome everybody into the agency. I have models who are from South Africa. They were also marginalized in their country. I have models who are from Asia. The geisha girl syndrome comes forward with their conversations. There are a lot of different ethnic groups in the world who have similar experiences to our Indigenous people.
Right.
A lot of the people that I work with now, I started Fashion Speaks in 2015, specifically to work with or on behalf of missing and murdered Indigenous women. The very first show we did was to raise funds for them. Every show that we've done since then has been the same. And we continue to do that. We plan on continuing to do that until we're able to resolve the issue.
Great work.
So the majority of the people that I do work for or with or on behalf of are Indigenous.
And do you find that the Indigenous women have a harder time finding work in that
Absolutely.
field of choice?
I think, well, I was the first top model in Canada who was Indigenous. And that made me an oddity, which is why I ended up going international as quickly as I did. Everybody in Japan wanted to see the Indian. Everybody in Germany wanted to see the Indian.
And how did
right?
you feel about that?
Terrified. I thought, what if I'm the only representation that they ever see and I make a bad impression?
Like we talked about in our trades, right? That's a commonality. If you're carrying that full weight on your shoulders,
It was
heavy.
terrifying. It really, really was. And I think that that's one of the things that we're now actually getting past. I sit on the International Indigenous Fashion Week Committee now, planning committee. We just got back from Paris. We took 12 Indigenous fashion designers with us. We took Indigenous makeup artists, hairstylists, models, photographers, everybody. And we took them all to Paris with us for Fashion Week. We are now planning Germany next. In fact, one of the fashion designers that I've worked closely with, who is also on my board of directors, is leaving for Germany Saturday morning. And she's doing cultural sensitivity training while she's there in a mini fashion show.
Incredible. So being able to take that work that you're passionate about and educate others, and as we know, that multiplies.
Well, that was the goal of Fashion Speaks, was to build a coalition of people in the fashion industry. Quite frankly, the fashion industry affects every single person alive. From the moment that you're born and somebody puts a diaper on your hiney, somebody designed that diaper. To the moment that you die and somebody selects your final resting outfit. The fashion industry affects you. So we have a massive voice. We just have to learn how to use it together.
Yeah. Thank you for that. How about you, Alex? How do you see you serve women primarily, but really in a structure that was designed not by women, and there must be unique challenges within that?
Yeah, I mean, probably every woman can understand the barriers that the average woman faces around representation in workplaces, control of family finances, childcare responsibilities, emotional labor responsibilities. Those are compounded exponentially when a person is fleeing violence. And those pieces become impossible to overcome. If you don't have supportive childcare for you to get to family court, like you can't show up to court with your kids. Judges don't like that. So all of those pieces make it incredibly hard for a woman to leave violence. I can't tell you the number of times I've heard a woman say that she's going to return to violence because she cannot support herself on what she's given by income assistance. It's not just a matter of going out and finding a job. That's not how it works when you're
so much more complicated
experiencing
than that.
trauma, when you're fleeing violence, when you have kids to care for, and then dealing with your own stuff. But it's hard to watch. Women have to return to those circumstances. They know their situations best and they know how to keep themselves safe as best as they can. But the reality is these are women that are returning to violence because that is the better option. Like that's the better option than trying to go it alone.
What a devastating thought that is the better option.
Because at least they know that.
Yeah.
They know what to expect. They know how to navigate that. They don't and can't oftentimes navigate the systems that we've set up to try and protect and catch them.
I'm sure there are a million different things, but if you had to pick one that you're like, this is the top identifier for me of something that I would change within the system so that it could accommodate women better, what would it be? Like a tangible change that could relatively easily be made.
A quick fix or one option would be in circumstances of domestic violence, the woman shouldn't have to leave the home with her children in the middle of the night. The perpetrator should be removed from the home.
That doesn't happen.
That's not usually what happens. Very rarely. There's a bit of a shifting policy around that in child protection right now, but for the most part it's women that are having to leave the family home, even if they've poured their finances and all of their resources and effort into building that family home. If you have that, it's going to be so much easier to navigate everything else.
Changes everything else. Because the car is attached to the home and the resources are attached to the home and all of those
I
things.
think if I could answer that a little bit too, I actually went through that. I owned my own home. A man moved in with me and my children. He was getting drunk. He would look at my 5-year-old daughter and say, "Nice ass." I wanted him out.
So you know you need out of the situation.
I needed out. I asked him to leave, he refused. I called the police, but because I was stupid enough to let him put the hydro and the gas utilities in his
I think
name.
we could reframe that, not stupid enough to perhaps not educated about
Yeah.
the process or the situation, which is why we need to talk about these things,
Exactly.
right? Which is the beautiful work that you're doing is future educating, so
What
that
I had to
women
do
know
was
better in the
leave
future.
my house. It was my house. But then I couldn't get help. I could not get help from social assistance because the house was in my name.
Which Alex witnesses every day, right? And that's why we
Yeah.
talk about these things, to put these changes that have needed to be done for generations.
So
in
that change
place
needs
now.
to be with the social
Yeah.
services department where they're helping women right now.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter whether they own the house or their name is on the house. They need help right now.
Yeah. And Natka, how about you?
I think we're talking about different women than the women that I work with. So the women that I work with don't have assets like that, and so quite a lot of them, they're exploited in ways I'm sure we all know.
Yeah,
So-
feel free to shift
yeah,
the
so-
conversation to that.
yeah,
to talk about
so
the way that
I-
applies to them.
Okay. So a lot of the women that I work with are substance users, and they've been homeless for years, for a long time, and so their relationship is woven together, not necessarily through home and assets and things like that, but often they'll go out and work, and then they're working for dope that her and her partner will share. And we're having a brief conversation too, just about how our services could work a bit better, because we are a co-ed facility, but we witness quite a lot of abuse in there. And it's tricky, like how do we do that? Because we know separating a couple isn't always the best either. People have to have they have to make their own choices and their own decisions, and when they have nothing, so they don't have any leverage, they often kind of gravitate back together. And there's, and I think it's well documented that substance use is attached to trauma and all of that. So the systems aren't working. So besides the fact we're removing the mom and her kids from the home, we have another system called the child welfare system that is making the mom do all the work to correct these things and separating mom from her children often. And we know through documentation and studies too that doesn't work either. So how are we fixing this? And then they come out of the child welfare system, say as children, and they age out, and then they end up homeless often. It's a straight line, and it's only becoming more public as well.
Yeah.
That, because I'm always interested in what is the foundation of homelessness, and it's a straight arrow from Association of Child Welfare. Doesn't mean you're going to be homeless if
No,
you're in
but the
child welfare.
correlation is strong.
Every single person I've worked with that's been homeless has had connections to child welfare.
And so as we see this rise in homelessness, the future, problems are apparent.
Yeah, and some of it has to do with the housing crisis though too. Like there's a lot more variables than just that, but I think they're really looking at it now because we have a real issue on our hands. And but they still have children even when they're homeless, but there's these big systems that aren't working.
Yeah.
And I don't know if there's a one cure.
I don't think that there is, but we
Yeah.
take small steps and try not to become discouraged, right? And as we elevate these female voices that are professional and knowledgeable, hopefully we're able to make those small changes one at a time that end up in changing of lives.
I kind of feel though what's missing in this narrative is the lived experience too, because there's quite a few voices that we're not hearing, and I think that's where we need to go, really. Because I was thinking about misogyny, and I was just kind of thinking when I was talking to Dana about it, I don't know what else I can add, but I'd like to hear more men speak on it. I'd like to hear people, because I feel like we're missing a big voice, and it's part of my mission to hear everybody and to hear what they have to say. because and it's easier for us to do the work too if we don't have to think of these ideas that don't work.
Right, and
Kind of-
speculate on what
yeah.
somebody in need needs.
Yeah, it's not very efficient.
Yeah.
So it's better to just ask people what they'd like, and I think we know exactly what they want. They honestly.
And that's-
They need more money, they need more
Yeah.
space, they need a place to live, like, so even sort of asking,
Things that most
Like we
people take
know.
for granted.
Yeah, and this is the strength of advocacy,
Yeah.
which is also what we bring to the table when we bring knowledgeable women. Thank you for being advocates. Thank you for being passionate about what you do and for working with vulnerable people who, like you say, it's much easier to marginalize and move to the side than it is to come alongside and elevate their voices too. But that's how change is made. Thank you, ladies, for joining us. Would you give these ladies a painless, right? And we'll just take one more minute to reset here, so feel free to grab a drink and grab a refreshment, and then we'll start with our last panel.